In light of increased immigration enforcement in Chicago, a new executive order signed Monday by Mayor Brandon Johnson designates ICE-free zones within the city.
City property and unwilling private businesses will no longer serve as staging grounds for these raids.
Chicago, the city of skyscrapers, struggle, and survival. A city that's faced protests, pandemics, and politics. But this time, something different is unfolding. A direct confrontation between local power and the federal government. Mayor Brandon Johnson has signed an order declaring ICE-free zones across Chicago, a bold act of defiance that's sending shockwaves from City Hall all the way to Washington.
The order prohibits ICE agents from using city-owned property to make arrests. Johnson says signs will be posted at city properties, including in the parking lots of Chicago public schools and Chicago Park District field houses.
The fact is, we cannot allow them to rampage throughout our city with no checks or balances. Nobody is above the law. If we break the law, you should be held accountable. If Congress will not check this administration, then Chicago will.
For some, it's a move of courage. For others, it's reckless rebellion. But one thing's for sure, Chicago has drawn a line. The order came after weeks of tension and chaos. Videos began circulating online showing immigration and customs. Enforcement agents conducting late-night raids in neighborhoods like Little Village and Brighton Park. Families woke to the sound of pounding on doors. Children watched as parents were handcuffed and taken away. Communities began to panic, and anger grew. At the center of it all was one demand: protection. Residents, activists, and city leaders called on Mayor Johnson to take action, to shield undocumented families, and stop what they called a campaign of fear. And then, in a packed press conference, he did just that. Standing before flashing cameras and rows of reporters, Johnson spoke with a calm but defiant tone. "Chicago will not be a staging ground for fear," he said. "Not in our schools. Not in our libraries, not in our hospitals, and not in our homes." The room erupted. Some applauded, others gasped. It was official. Chicago was declaring ICE-free zones. The new order bans ICE agents from entering city-owned buildings without a signed warrant from a federal judge. That means no raids in public schools, no arrests in community clinics, and no surveillance in local shelters. City workers were instructed: don't open the doors, don't share information, and report any federal presence immediately. To Chicago's immigrant families, it was a promise, a safety, at least for now. To federal officials, it was an act of open defiance. Within hours, the response from Washington was fierce. A statement from Homeland Security called the order a dangerous obstruction of federal law. ICE officials warned that Chicago's decision could shield criminals and hinder justice. Behind closed doors, White House advisors began exploring ways to retaliate.
D. Superintendent Larry Snelling disputed the notion. He said not only were his officers on scene for hours, but they were even hit by tear gas.
Those who will tell you that our officers weren't there, say that to the 27 officers who were affected by the chemical agents that were deployed by federal agents.
Including cutting millions in federal funding meant for city safety programs. But Johnson didn't back down. "Our priority is people's safety," he told reporters, "not political threats." The line was drawn, and both sides were preparing for a fight. Across the city, the impact was immediate. In Pilsen, parents gathered outside a local school, holding signs that read, "No fear in our classrooms." In Uptown, community groups held Know Your Rights workshops, teaching residents what to do if ICE showed up. Volunteers handed out pamphlets in English, Spanish, and Arabic, outlining the new protections. One mother said, "For the first time in years, I can walk my son to school without looking over my shoulder." A teacher added, "We used to see unmarked cars circling the block. Now we can tell them to leave." The law protects us, but not everyone agreed. Critics of the mayor's decision called it reckless. Some city council members warned that it could create a sanctuary for criminals. They argued that ICE-free zones would make it harder to track violent offenders who use undocumented status as cover. Local police officials, speaking anonymously, expressed frustration, saying coordination between departments was already strained. At a police union meeting, one officer said, We're caught in the middle. The city says protect them, the feds say arrest them. Who are we supposed to follow? The confusion spread quickly, and as both sides hardened their stance, ordinary Chicagoans found themselves living in the crossfire. In the South Side, activists clashed with ICE during a dawn raid. Footage showed agents detaining 3 people as protesters shouted, "You have no right to be here." Moments later, officers used pepper spray to disperse the crowd. The video went viral, fueling outrage and fear. Within hours, city officials demanded an explanation. ICE claimed the raid targeted a suspect wanted for trafficking. Activists said it was harassment, plain and simple. Truth or not, the images spoke louder than any statement. Chicago was at a breaking point. The mayor's move sparked debate across the nation. Supporters called it an act of courage, a stand for human rights. Opponents saw it as chaos, an invitation for lawlessness. Cable news hosts, politicians, and commentators all weighed in, each with their own version of what law and order should mean. In Los Angeles, officials praised Chicago's decision, saying they were exploring similar protections. In New York, activists marched in solidarity. But in Washington, the message was icy cold. Federal lawmakers introduced a proposal to withhold funding from any city that interferes with ICE operations. The country was splitting, not just politically, but morally. Inside Chicago, the tension was tangible. Every knock on a door could be ICE. Every siren could mean another raid. And yet, in neighborhoods like Back of the Yards and Humboldt Park, there was also a new kind of unity. Neighbors watching out for neighbors. Communities forming rapid response teams to document arrests and help families find legal aid. A volunteer said, "We used to hide. Now we film everything." Another added, "If they come, we'll be ready." The city was learning how to fight back, not with weapons, but with knowledge, cameras, and courage. Behind the scenes, city lawyers scrambled to defend the legality of the mayor's order. They argued that local governments have the right to protect residents within city-owned spaces. Federal lawyers disagreed, calling the order unconstitutional. The courtroom battle was inevitable, and both sides began preparing. One federal source hinted that Chicago could soon face a lawsuit for interfering with federal enforcement. But legal experts noted, this isn't new territory. San Francisco, Seattle, and New York have all faced similar challenges and survived. The difference this time, the national spotlight. Chicago had become ground zero for America's immigration debate. Amid the chaos, stories from the ground continued to pour in. A nurse from a community clinic recounted how ICE agents once showed up demanding patient records. Now, she said, "We can legally tell them no." A high school principal described a morning when students burst into tears after hearing ICE vans nearby. "Now," she said, "we have rules that protect them. We can shut our doors and keep our kids safe." But even with protections, fear remained. Rumors of raids spread faster than facts. Unmarked cars near a playground caused panic, even when they weren't ICE. The line between reality and paranoia grew thinner each day. As weeks passed, the standoff intensified. Federal officials launched new enforcement operations on Chicago's outskirts, suburbs like Cicero, Melrose Park, and Broadview, technically outside city jurisdiction. It was a move meant to send a message. Federal power doesn't stop at the city limits. But in response, protesters took to the streets once again. Thousands marched downtown chanting "ICE out of Chicago." Police monitored from a distance as activists waved flags, held candles, and demanded justice. The protests were peaceful until night fell. A group of masked demonstrators clashed with officers near Federal Plaza. Windows were broken. Smoke filled the air. The next morning, headlines read, "Chicago burns over immigration battle." Mayor Johnson addressed the city again. "Chicago will not back down," he said firmly. "Our values are not negotiable." He called for calm, but his tone carried defiance. Federal officials responded with threats to deploy additional agents, saying Chicago's resistance was hindering national security. To many Chicagoans, it sounded like a warning. A storm was coming.